A small town doctor was seen as caring and generous to those outside his home, but what happened behind closed doors was another story. It makes us wonder how well we know anyone. I'm Charlie Worrell,
And I'm Eric Carter Londine.
and this is Crime Lines and Consequences. Hello, Eric. How are you?
Hey, Charlie, I'm doing good. How are you?
I am doing great. Are you surviving the heat over there?
Yeah, it's actually not too hot, except for the fact that I don't have AC in my studio.
Except for that. So if Eric melts on screen, you'll know why.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll do our best to get through this fast enough before that happens. So, as always, enough with our small talk. We're going to get into the case we're discussing tonight, and it is all centered around one family called the Cavaness family. I do want to say that normally we've been covering unsolved cases up to this point. This one is a solved case, but it does have issues that I think are really important that we talk about. And I do want to recommend the book Murder in Little Egypt, which was a major source for this episode. I read it years ago. It's a very deep look into the making of a narcissist. We'll just put it that way. So the Cavaness family starts with Dr. Dale Cavaness, who was a doctor, obviously. He had a wife named Marion, and they would go on to have 4 children together. All boys. They were Mark, Kevin, Sean, and Patrick. Marion was not Dale's first wife. She's the second wife, and they met shortly after he had separated from his first wife. So he went from high school sweetheart to divorce to the next person in line pretty much immediately. They married in 1952, which was about a year after he left his first wife. He was a medical student, and Marion was a nurse, so that seemed to give them something in common, except Marion hated being a nurse, so she switched careers and became a flight attendant instead.
Oh, wow. It's a big difference.
It's a big difference. She loved to travel. She loved to see the world. She liked the big city, which is pretty important to the story. Dale got his internship after school in Baltimore, which was perfect for Marion because she loved the big city. She's near major airports. She can get better flights and her career can move up, and she loved the East Coast. She was happy to be out of the Midwest. Dale was a very intelligent person and a very good doctor. So after the internship, he was offered a job pretty much right away, right when his internship was up in Baltimore. And Marion was like, all right, let's do this. And Dale said, no, we're heading back to the Midwest because he loved the Midwest, which, as someone in the Midwest who loves Kansas City, I can't say I love the Midwest, but I do love the city. Not so much for Dale, but he did get a job in St. Louis and he took it, but he did not tell Marion about the job until after he accepted it. He said, I got a job in St. Louis and now we're moving. So this story is a bit of a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde character. There are always traces, though, of the other side in everything Dale Cavaness did, and you'll see it here. To his family, over the years, he was predominantly, to them, controlling and abusive. The very first instance of physical abuse in the marriage happened on their first wedding anniversary. They were a young couple. They were establishing themselves. So they did what young couples who don't have a lot of money do for a special occasion. They bought food they normally couldn't afford and got some champagne. Marion wasn't a heavy drinker, and Dale was usually on call as the new, as a medical resident and an intern, that he couldn't normally drink. So this was new for them to kind of indulge in some drinks. What is a little confusing to me is that it says they had 3 bottles of champagne. And if I'm not a heavy drinker, my husband's not a heavy drinker, I don't know why I would have bought 3 bottles of champagne. But maybe Dale bought it because he had the bulk of it. And so as they're sitting there, They had had several drinks, most of them Dale had. Marion started talking about their future, and she mentioned not being in the Midwest anymore and living where they could live in the world. And Dale asked what she meant by that, and she said she just couldn't see them living in that area forever. At that point, Dale got up, he walked over to her, and he punched her in the jaw. Absolutely blindsided her with this because it's not like they were in the middle of an argument even. She said something, he said something, and next thing you know, he just punched her in the jaw.
That's terrible.
Marion didn't know what to do. She went to bed in the guest room, locked the door, and the next morning when Dale woke up and didn't know where she was, he went and found her in the guest room and was like, "Why are you sleeping in here?" And she's like, "You hit me." She had a bruise on her face to be like, "You punched me right here. This is why I slept in here." And he claimed to have no memory of
Hmm.
having done it. And he was extremely apologetic to her. Marion decided that this incident was probably a drunken one off and it wasn't a big deal. Not that it wasn't a big deal, but it wasn't going to repeat. But it turned out it would not be a one off incident. But as long as Dale wasn't drinking, his abuse was definitely less physical and more controlling verbal abuse. And that's not any better. Eric and I can both attest to that.
Mhm.
It has a lot of damage to who you are as a person. But to Marion in her 1950s thinking, I mean, people think this way today still,
Yeah.
but in the 1950s, not being physical abuse made it more or less not really feel like real abuse to her. So she told herself this isn't that big of a deal and she could handle it.
I think also that society had that mentality as well. Like it wasn't just Marion that felt like that. I
Mhm.
think that all of society felt like any kind of abuse in the home was nobody else's business but the people who lived in
Right.
that house, and it wasn't polite to talk
Mhm.
about it.
I really think when I think back on growing up, I remember in the late 80s, early 90s when I was a kid, people talking about emotional abuse and people saying, "You can't emotionally abuse people. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me," was something like
Mhm.
were being actively taught, which we know now is absolutely not true. And a lot of people knew it back then. But as far as like general society, verbal abuse, um, a husband with a high pressure job and a young family, well, yeah, he's going to blow up here and there. There were a lot of excuses for it.
Mhm.
They ended up moving in 1955 after their son Mark was born to live very close to Dale's hometown, which is in El Dorado, Illinois. Again, he didn't tell Marion he was planning this move. He actually bought a medical practice there and a house and then said, "We're moving back to my hometown." Marion never saw the house before they moved in. Dale could have had any big city job he wanted, and you would think, well, his wife wants to live in a big city. Maybe they could compromise. I mean, St. Louis sounds like a decent compromise. It's a city, but it's not too big. But Dale wanted to be a country doctor. And living near Dale's overbearing mother didn't seem like something Marion was really that keen to do. It didn't sound fun, and, spoiler alert, it wasn't fun. But Dale didn't give her much of a say, and at this point, they have children together, and she was following her husband, supporting his career the way she was supposed to.
It just for me, if I was in a relationship with somebody and they did that to me, I that would be it. It would be over. Like I'm not gonna be forced to move somewhere that I had no say in
Yeah.
just because you decided that it was a good idea. I can't imagine how angry Marion must have been in that moment.
And how trapped she must have felt. This was the 1950s when women couldn't get credit cards without their husband's approval. And now she has a young child with him. So they ended up going and moving to El Dorado or right outside of it, and she tried to make the best of it. Now Dale, he decided He didn't just want to be a doctor. He had this idea that because he understood genetics as a doctor, he could run a cattle breeding farm and really breed the best of the best cattle out there. He would sink a lot of money into his various cattle raising ventures in an attempt to kind of get rich, but none of it panned out. In 1956, their second son Kevin was born, and in 1962 they had Sean, who was their third of what would grow to be four sons. Dale was working long hours. He did whatever he pleased, which was mostly fine with Marion because if he was not home, he could not, abuse them. And while he was at that point not physically abusive towards the kids, he was very verbally abusive. And there was no telling what would set him off. And people like that are always so difficult to manage because you don't know what's going to set them off because it's not you setting them off, it's them getting set off. And so you could leave your blanket in the living room for 5 days and dad comes home one day and suddenly is mad about everything else and that blanket is now getting thrown across the room, you're getting yelled at. You know what I mean? Like those
Mhm.
things happen in these homes and that's what the Cavaness kids were experiencing.
I definitely experienced that firsthand. I know what it was like. You never knew what was gonna set somebody like that off. You just don't know. And
Yeah.
it could be anything or nothing that it comes into becoming something just because that person
Mhm.
feels like they wanna fly off the handle.
Yeah. You do the same thing 5 days in a row and it's fine, and on the 6th day, they're in a bad mood, and now
Mhm.
it's a problem, and now it's your problem.
Right.
There was physical abuse continuing towards Marion on and off. There were periods of relative peace. It wasn't really till the boys were older that Dale would not even try to control it in front of them. So it took a while before they saw it towards their mother, but they definitely experienced it. But that is not the Dale the community saw.
Mm.
A far cry. This is such a I feel like such a typical story here. He put his best foot forward by and large with the community. He did something that a lot of doctors at the time would not do. He took public aid, he took workman's comp, and he would take patients who could not pay him. Because public insurance and workman's comp still pay less than private insurance or even cash patients. So a lot of doctors would say, we don't take, Medicaid is what we call it now. I don't take Medicaid. I don't take Medicare. I only take private insurance. But Dale would take these lower payments. And it was under the pretense of being such a caring, good, generous country doctor, the guy that'll make visits to your home and really care about you. He would charge very little to deliver babies. He would not charge women for their prenatal care at all, which is really amazing if you think about it because women in poverty who can't afford that copay if they have insurance or they can't afford it at all if they don't have insurance, they would just not get proper care while pregnant. They would have to go without it because they couldn't afford it. Well, Dale would not charge them for it.
Mm.
So people were seeking health care that they were not otherwise getting.
It's so typical of this type of abusive personality that they almost go to the extreme other end of things in public in order to totally disarm everybody around them and make it seem like virtually impossible that this could be the same person. Like if Marion was to go to the police or go to somebody in her community, maybe even in, let's say she went to church, maybe in her
Mhm.
church community, to say, my husband is beating me up every chance he gets, no one's going to believe her.
Right, because he's
They're,
the nice doctor.
yeah, he helps so many people. So obviously there's a problem with her.
Exactly.
It's just so classic.
It is, and Marion would even see this side of him in the community because she kept his books, and he would actually tell her, "Don't tell me who paid, don't tell me who didn't pay, because I don't want the care I give them to be dependent on whether or not they paid." So she's hearing him say these things about how he's caring about the community. And once a year, they would sit down and go through all the outstanding balances, and he would write most of them off. So people would owe him money and he would not even pursue it. And then he would still see them as patients. So Marion seeing him show this care for people who are virtual strangers to him
Mm-hmm.
versus how he was treating her and her children.
Wow.
But we do know that these Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde types can't completely separate it, right? So parts of each side show through. There are times where Dale would be kind to his kids or his family or take them out somewhere or they do some family thing together that was fun and exciting. But then he also had a mean streak in public. So he wasn't always Mr. Nice Guy, though he would play it off as pranks or jokes, which I don't know, that sets me off because
Mm-hmm.
I definitely have experience with people who would passive aggressively do something and be like, "Oh, I was just kidding. I was just teasing. Just it's funny. You can't take a joke." So this entire I think that's why I'm so obsessed with this case is this guy is just like a picture of he's like a group of people in my life at various points and I'm really getting to see it from an as an outsider and it's helping me understand some things. But one of the things he would do one of the jokes he liked to play on his patients, which is so disgusting, is he would pull an X-ray that wasn't theirs. So, like, maybe they're in because they're having side pain, and instead of showing them a rib fracture, which is what they would have, he'd show them like a lung that has tumors all over it. And he would basically diagnose them with something absolutely terrible based on these X-rays. And then when they're getting upset, he'd be like, "Oh, I'm just kidding. Here's your X-ray instead. Look, it's just a minor fracture. You're fine."
That is so abusive. Like, it's not even funny. It's straight up
No,
abusive.
I'm so shocked that he would do this, and he did it repeatedly. And he'd say he's just kidding, and then, "Oh well, can't you take a joke?" Oh, that's how Dr. Dale is. He's that kind of guy. He got so many passes. One time, he knowingly exposed his receptionist to a patient that had the mumps when she had never had the mumps. So, like chickenpox or all these other childhood illnesses, like my kids got hand, foot, and mouth disease a couple of years ago, and my husband apparently never had it, and he got it from them, and he was absolutely in so much pain. He had blisters everywhere, sores. He was sicker than the kids because a lot of these illnesses are worse if you get them for the first time as an adult. Now, fortunately, she did not contract the mumps, but that's a huge risk to take on someone's health as a doctor. I mean, unbelievable.
That's just I don't even know if there's a word for it.
No.
I want to say violence because it seems very violent,
Yep.
but it's just it's so wrong, and it shows, I think, to me how manipulative he was. Like, he's
Mhm.
manipulating this whole community, and then he's taking advantage of that fact that he's been so kind to abuse them just so that he
Mhm.
can kind of get off on it. It's really bizarre.
He absolutely was getting something out of this. So, one more story for you because I cannot resist this one. Just another I mean, I just can't believe he did this. So, he had a 16-year-old office worker, and he sent her out on an errand, and she took his car. Well, when she came out of wherever she was running the errand, she got into a different car. It was the same make and model, but it wasn't his car. She thought it was Dale's car. And when she put the key in, it actually worked because, I mean, people don't really, there are only so many combinations of keys, right? So this can still happen today. And especially back then, it was a lot more common for there just to be a few variations of car keys because who's going to get in the wrong car? Well, she did. She drove the car all the way back to the office, and Dale looked and knew it wasn't his car because license plate. And instead of going, "Why are you in this car?" He thought it would be hilarious to call the police on this 16-year-old and maybe this shows off that power or that charm he had in the community. He talked to the police officers and said told them what happened, and got them to join in on pulling a prank on a 16-year-old. And they show up and handcuff her as she's crying, and Dale's yelling at her that she's a thief. She stole a car. All of
Wow.
this was a joke, just a joke. So this is what he's doing in the community, but it's passive aggressive. It's like, I'm going to do these really terrible things, but then say, just kidding. And because I didn't send you a bill, you're going to think I'm a good guy. And it
Unbelievable.
worked. We'll get into how well it worked in a little bit, but this is what they were living with. And the family wasn't even getting the just joking side. I mean, sometimes they'd get that, but they got it with a lot of more aggressive things. In 1966, Marion's pregnant with their fourth kid, and she finds out that Dale was cheating on her. And for a while, this was kind of a long-term affair. And at this point, he mostly stayed out of the home with his new girlfriend. He didn't move towards divorce or legal separation. Marion didn't either at this point, but neither of them were really looking to reconcile. Marion was happy with Dale not being around very much. And he, to support his family, as was his duty in the 1960s, was depositing money into Marion's account to pay for family expenses. Eventually, the checks started bouncing because Dale was a terrible business person, and he was sinking all this money into all of his bad business practices, and his income as a doctor wasn't making up for it. So he's got these side farms that are all failing, and largely because he was impulsive and he drank too much, which made him a terrible decision maker. So Marion ended up getting a job to support the kids. So she's balancing young children and a job while also, to some degree, having to appease Dale as he's off with his new girlfriend.
My God. I mean, for somebody who seemed to feel like he was going to get rich quick with that whole I know genetics thing,
Yeah.
it just goes to show how these narcissistic type people will build up their whole foundation of their house on cards. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's all unstable, and it just takes one thing to go wrong for all of it to come crashing down.
Yeah, one of the things with narcissists is their ego is the most important thing, and they feel that they have an inflated sense of it. So any attack on how they perceive themselves is what will spark these angry outrages. So as the boys got older and they would help him on these farming businesses, which were failing, which was a blow to his ego, that's when he started turning more abusive towards them. If anything went wrong, he'd pick up the nearest thing and hit them with it or throw it at them, because he was taking these blows to his perception of himself. And then he was lashing out on his family, on literal teenagers and children.
Wow, what a scumbag.
Yeah, and just wait, like we're just at the surface right
Oh
now.
man, here we go.
So Dale's having all these financial issues, and then he got lucky with a little bit of a cash windfall. One day while Marion was at work, Patrick was around 3 or 4 years old, and he was home with the babysitter. He got into some matches when she wasn't watching him and managed to light the drapes on fire. Everyone got out okay. The babysitter kind of panicked, so also did nothing to try to stamp out the fire. And so by the time the fire department got there, the house was a total loss. When the homeowner's insurance payout came, Dale took the money, but he didn't rebuild the house. He left Marion and his 4 children literally homeless. He pocketed the insurance money. Marion and the boys, for a few months, they were bouncing between friends' houses and a motel. Eventually, Dale put 2 trailers on a property, and he said it was a temporary solution to their housing till they could get a new house, but it became permanent. Dale blew through all the money. He was not looking to rebuild or give them a new house, or buy one. That was not going to happen.
Wow.
And then, if that wasn't enough for Marion, which it very nearly was, it wasn't long after this point, in April 1971, that Dale got behind the wheel drunk, and he caused a serious car crash that killed a 29-year-old man and his infant daughter.
Mm.
Marion saw how little Dale was affected by the fact that he killed 2 people, including a child. And he was facing legal and civil consequences for what happened, but emotionally, he did not seem to care that 2 people were dead.
Wow.
And that's when she decided it was time to make it final, and she filed for divorce. She got a job in St. Louis and moved with her boys there. I do have a little side note. We're going to jump ahead in the timeline a decade. Marion went to get remarried a decade later. And that's when she learned Dale never signed the final divorce decree.
Of course not.
She was still married to him. She had to hire a lawyer to sort it out. It was just his last chance to exercise some type of control. And mind you, he's still with his girlfriend that he got with a few, like, years ago during their marriage. He just would not do that one last thing to set Marion free. She had to get an attorney to deal with it.
Holy shit.
So the family was trying to move on to some degree from Dale. Obviously, he's the father of these children. So they're moving to St. Louis, but we know you don't get over childhood abuse overnight. So the oldest son, Mark, really struggled. They moved to St. Louis in his senior year of high school. So he goes from a more rural area to a suburb outside of a city, new high school, trauma from his childhood, and he fell in with the wrong crowd. And it says he began doing drugs, but the only references to drugs that I keep seeing is marijuana, which I know in the 1970s was considered doing drugs. But if an 18-year-old today was doing pot, I would just be like, okay.
Right.
But maybe there was more to it. I don't know. But he didn't end up passing his senior year, so he did not graduate.
I think it's pretty common for children who have been exposed to abusive situations that have that trauma in their childhood to experience or explore substances to help
Mhm.
them deal with some of that pain that they carry around with them all the time. And I think it's something that, it doesn't really get looked at favorably by a lot of the general
Mhm.
public, but it is a reality of what people who have gone through childhood trauma try to do to cope with their lives.
Mhm. And if we're thinking about, like, alcohol and marijuana, they're depressants, they're sedatives. They bring you down. So if you are in a state of hypervigilance half your childhood because you don't know when dad's gonna come through and hit you, or mom's, not in this case, but for others, mom is gonna throw something at you.
Mhm.
When you don't know and you're always hypervigilant, that can cause you to just be in this spiral of anxiety, and sometimes the only thing that quiets it is something that helps sedate you. And
Mhm.
if you're not going to a doctor and getting medical treatment that way, self-medicating through the use of marijuana or alcohol does happen. There's a reason medical marijuana is used for anxiety, but also it's nice if it's supervised by a doctor when it is being used for mental
Right.
health.
Absolutely.
So the summer after Mark's senior year that he didn't pass, he and Kevin, which is the second son, they went out to Dale's farm and lived in one of the trailers to work for the summer. And Mark absolutely hated it. Dale had not softened at all towards his children in the several months they had moved away. Mark hated that he was being berated by Dale for being a failure and a disappointment, and about his, quote unquote, drug use. Never mind that Dale was a full blown alcoholic and did start at some point using prescription drugs. It was Mark was the problem. He
Mm.
was a disappointment, and Mark also hated the work of the farm. Dale was as nice of a boss as you can imagine, right? So when the summer was over, Mark moved on. He began taking jobs a little away from the area, and he would just take whatever he could. But he eventually fell on hard times. He had a good job, he lost it, he was having trouble finding another one, so he found himself falling back on the sure thing, working his father's farm. He'd have a place to live, he'd have some income, he'd have food. He was about 22, and Marion wanted him to move back to St. Louis and get away from Dale. She didn't think it was a good idea for him to be there, constantly berated. He wasn't going to heal if he was staying in the situation.
Mhm.
So, Easter of 1977, Marion and all the boys were going to the El Dorado area, and she hoped to talk to Mark. They were going to see Mark, and she hoped to talk to him about moving back to St. Louis. So it was Marion and her younger sons, Kevin, Sean, and Patrick. They all arrived on Friday, April 8th, and they were staying in Dale's parents' old house. At this point, they had both passed away. They expected to see Mark pretty much right away when they got there because they were coming to see him. He wanted them to come, but he didn't show up.
Oh no.
Yeah. On Saturday morning, Dale did. He came over to the house to see the boys, and Marion asked, "Where's Mark?" And Dale said he hadn't seen Mark since the previous Monday. Kevin said he must be with a friend, but then Dale said he had a feeling Mark was dead.
Why would he say that?
Right. Now, I
Oh God.
imagine with his history of being mean-spirited with comments like that and being a prankster, that they could easily just brush it off as that just one of these pranks that he thought was funny, no one else thought was funny, and he was just trying to irritate them. So Kevin decided to go get the farm pickup truck and drive around to look for Mark on the property. And Sean, who was 15 at the time, decided to tag along. So they went out to get to the truck, and it was at a different part in the property. And so they go out there and they see the truck, but the driver's side door of the truck was open. So Sean, again, just 15, walked up to the truck and saw Mark's body nearby. Now, this is a rural area, and there had already been animal activity on the remains. So this was truly horrific sight for anyone, let alone a 15-year-old.
It's just going to traumatize the poor kid for the rest of his life.
Absolutely.
Oh, it's awful.
So inside the truck, they saw a shotgun, and it was in its case, but the barrel was sticking out the end, and it was pointing towards the open driver's side door. And there was a wire coat hanger that was wedged in the trigger guard. So the local sheriff and his deputies arrived, and they began investigating the scene. But according to a state investigator who came by later that day, they did less investigating and more contaminating. They were smoking and just dropping cigarette butts on the ground at a murder scene. They had looked through the pickup without gloves. They handled the shotgun, which made fingerprints completely worthless. And you just got to love a 1970s small town investigation, I guess.
I guess. I mean, I don't love it, but I guess
Don't love it.
people do.
Most of what they had, because the scene had been so contaminated, was what they got on autopsy. And they found that Mark was likely dead for less than 20 hours when he was found, and he was shot once at close range. So it was possible that he was sitting in the truck with the door open when he was shot from the passenger side, and then he fell out the open door. But it was also possible that he was in the process of getting the gun out of the vehicle when he was shot. Because there was a shell casing found, and it was outside the gun case, not inside, the investigators initially leaned towards this being a murder. Someone shot Mark and then placed the gun in the case. Maybe they even put the coat hanger in the way on purpose to make it look like a suicide or an accident.
Mm-hmm.
But there were others who were kind of convinced by this coat hanger trick. And they thought Mark was getting out of the truck, and he turned to put the gun in the case, but he didn't see the coat hanger, and somehow that pulled the trigger, and this was an accident. So we have investigators believing two different things. They did follow up on a few leads, trying to sort it out. They did look into Mark's drug use, which seemed to be a very minor point in his life. It's not like he was deep in some drug scene. The cartel wasn't after him. It wasn't anything like that. But during this investigation, they found out that Dale had taken out a $40,000 life insurance policy on Mark 2 months before his death.
Don't be suspicious. Don't be suspicious.
Well, the police at this point in 1977 were more aware of Dale's violent side because
Mhm.
he had gotten arrested for a bar fight. And when he was locked up for the bar fight, he completely destroyed the jail cell he was in. So this hidden violent side was a lot less hidden as his financial stress and his drinking increased.
Right.
So an insurance policy and a history of violence are not enough evidence for murder charges, and it wasn't even clear at this point if this was a murder. So this case went cold and it would remain open. But Dale ended up facing other legal issues. So you remember back when I said Dale didn't charge people for medical services?
Mhm.
It doesn't mean he didn't find a different way to make money.
Oh, no.
For every account Dale forgave or undercharged, he was falsifying paperwork to bill insurance companies more than what was owed. He would tell Workman's Comp that he saw a patient for far more appointments than he actually did. He was committing insurance fraud. So
Wow.
so he looked like he was willing to go without in order to provide care for the less fortunate, but he absolutely did not go without. He was just taking the money from somewhere else.
That is so devious because,
Mhm.
like, this was his rouse for presenting this personality to the community of what an amazing person he is
Exactly.
and how great he is.
And even that was a fraud.
But we should have known that
Yeah.
somebody like this would defraud in one way or another and get what they want out of it no matter what. It's just, but I'm just shocked, and I'm not shocked easily.
He ended up getting a little sloppy with it, and he was indicted on 16 felony fraud charges for medical billing in 1980, but for a number of reasons, including a lot of legal maneuvering, it was reduced to a single misdemeanor, and he barely got a slap on the wrist.
Good grief.
And then he ended up having a fire at one of his trailers, and he collected the insurance on that. And then he made so many small insurance claims over the years for missing and destroyed property that he started having trouble finding anyone who would insure him for anything because he was making so many claims.
Is this foreshadowing?
So yeah, he's made quite a bit of money between a house fire,
Mm.
life insurance on a son who just so happened to die 2 months later, and another fire and all these other things, and medical billing. Dale Cavaness was a bad businessman, but he really knew how insurance worked. That's
Mm.
the one thing he understood. So we are going to fast forward to 1984. And at this point, Marian's remarried, living in Wisconsin with Patrick, who at that point was the only minor child left in the family. Kevin was married and out on his own, and Sean was now 22. And he had really struggled after Mark's death. He was only 15 when he found his brother's remains, and obviously that was very difficult. While still in high school, he turned to alcohol. He ended up dropping out of school. He later tried to work towards his GED while also attending a community college, but then he dropped out of those as well. But he was fighting for his sobriety and his recovery. He went to rehab, he went to AA. He would be off and on with his sobriety, which relapse is part of the process of recovery. But what he was learning through all of this was that it wasn't just the trauma of finding Mark. That's where he was putting everything.
Mm.
He realized that a lot of his problems started before that with an abusive father. Dale treated Sean much the same way he treated Mark, telling him he was worthless, he was a failure, he was a disappointment. And the sad thing with Sean was of the 4 boys, he was the most desperate for Dale's approval, which made him a target
Mhm.
because he wanted it more and Dale got more out of withholding it. This guy is like sadistic.
Yeah.
When Sean realized that Dale was a big part of why he was struggling, he thought the best way to proceed was to heal his relationship with Dale, which is something that I learned myself in Al-Anon is not the healing you're looking for. So in Al-Anon, they call it detach with love. You can say, I love you, I wish we could have the relationship we deserve, but that's not where we are. And I need to put up a boundary to protect myself, but I still love you. Because you can't have a relationship with someone they're not willing to have with you. And you can't force it. So you have to either accept what they're offering you or detach with love or without. Both are fine,
Mhm.
but detach. But Sean wasn't detaching. He was trying to force an attachment that I personally don't think Dale was even capable of.
I think it just shows the early age at which his trauma started,
Mhm. Absolutely.
because he's so desperately hanging on to this idea that he could have a normal relationship
Mhm.
with this man. And I understand, I relate to that. I had some of the similar trappings growing up. I know how easy it is to get your hopes up, and
Mhm.
how devastating it is when those hopes come crashing down. I can't,
Yeah.
I just, it's really, my heart goes out to Sean. It must have been an impossible situation for him.
And I think back to being 22, and that's when I was really starting to unpack a lot of the same things
Mhm.
and realizing that I can put up boundaries and things like that. So Sean was probably at this point on the cusp
Yeah.
of realizing that and getting to where he could detach.
Yeah.
So in 1984, Sean was living on his own in an apartment in St. Louis, but he didn't have a great financial situation. He would get some help from his mom, but he basically had most of his utilities on and off. You know how it goes. You kind of cycle through electricity, gas, or water. And
Mhm.
so he absolutely had no phone service. But he was unfortunately still pursuing Dale and the love and approval he thought his father might give him one day. So it was Wednesday, December 12th, 1984, and Dale called his other son, Kevin, who lived in the area, to try to get a message to Sean that there were some papers he needed to sign. And this wasn't entirely unusual because Dale had control over a trust fund that his father had set up for the grandkids. But Dale also had some investment things that he had in the boys' names that he told them were for tax purposes. So Kevin went out to Sean's apartment and left a note saying, "Can you get in touch with me?" And when Sean got the note, he found a phone and he called Kevin, and Kevin put him in touch with Dale. So the next morning, around 7:30, this is December 13th, a man in a rural area outside of St. Louis was heading out to the field to feed his horse, and he found the body of a young man. He had been shot once in the side of the head and once in the back of the head. Liver temperature would show that the man had likely died between 5 and 7 a.m., so not long before he was found. And there was no ID on the body, but based on prints that were on file for a traffic related arrest, fairly minor, the John Doe was soon identified as Sean Cavaness.
Mm.
So the shot to the back of his head had stippling, and that's those small abrasions made by gunpowder. And that indicated that the shot was at somewhat close range. Based on the diameter of the stippling, the absence of marks from the muzzle touching the skin, it was said that the gun was probably about an inch away. It wasn't contact, but it was very close. Now, the shot to the side of the head, however, was estimated to be more like 18 to 24 inches away. So obviously, these are not self inflicted. The first thought here was drug or gang related crime because the 1980s in St. Louis, drugs and gangs were a major issue.
Mhm.
But then the investigators went to Sean's apartment building to try to retrace his movements, and they talked to two of his neighbors, and these were incredible witnesses. So the night before Sean's body was found, around 10 p.m., his downstairs neighbor was driving home and felt that the car behind her was following too closely. So she got spooked. So she parked her car and basically ran into her apartment and told her husband she was worried that some man was following her. So they're both looking out the window and they see the car continue down the street, turn around, and then park in front of the apartment complex. They decided to jot down the license plate just in case this was a thing. because this car was acting a little suspicious. A short time later, they're still looking out the window and they see Sean walking by, and the person in the car got out and the two hugged. Clearly, someone Sean knew. They walked towards the apartment, and when they were under a street light, the neighbor recognized the other person. It was Dale.
Hmm.
Now, she was pretty sure it was him, but she had only ever seen him once before. This couple reported that they heard a lot of noise from Sean's apartment for a while. There was walking around, laughing, that sort of thing. Nothing violent. The couple then went to bed around 1 a.m. And at some point, the husband heard the sound of Sean and his guest leaving. The door closing and the footsteps down woke him up. Now, to confirm who the other man was, thankfully, the couple still had the license plate written down on a piece of paper, even though they realized they thought no big deal. So the police ran the license plate, the couple written down, and I can give you one guess who it came back to.
Dale.
That is correct. This confirmed that Dale was not just in the area, but with Sean the night before his body was found.
Can we just take a moment and appreciate these neighbors for being good
Absolutely.
neighbors? Like, that's what I hope would happen if something was going down with me. That people were paying attention, writing down license plate numbers, and talking about this stuff. Like, that's incredible.
You don't know how many times I go through my phone camera roll and all I'm doing is deleting pictures of cars that were either in my neighbor's driveway or in front of our houses that I didn't recognize, just in case.
Mm-hmm.
Just in case this is something. And then when nothing happens and I'm deleting photos because I have no room left on my phone, I'm deleting a bunch of those. I don't think it hurts to be a little suspicious. I just take a picture and move on with my day.
Tell me you're a true crime podcast creator without telling me you're a true crime podcast creator.
You should see the giant picture window I have in the front of my house where I can see everything.
Amazing. Good for these people. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, they single-handedly solved this case. So the investigators met with Dale when he came to St. Louis after supposedly hearing for the first time that Sean had been killed. When they asked him when he last saw Sean, Dale said it was about a month before.
Oh, God.
So the police know he's lying. They knew he had been with his son hours before his body was found. So they're asking themselves, why is he lying? So the police waited until after Sean's funeral, which was the next Monday. And when Dale was packing up his car to leave St. Louis to go back home, they pulled him over and arrested him on suspicion of murder. Dale waived his right to remain silent or have an attorney present during questioning because, internet diagnosis here. He's a narcissist. He loves to talk. Mm-hmm. He's pretty convinced he can talk his way out of anything. So he was confronted with the evidence that he was at Sean's apartment and he still denied it. They have his license plate and they have 2 eyewitnesses and he still said no. He was home with his girlfriend, Martha, and she would back it up. She did not, in fact, back him up. She did at first.
Go Martha.
I know. Martha did the right thing here. She did at first, but the police pushed her a little, and she was like, "I wasn't with him that night. I don't know where he was." The pressure of questioning also got to Dale, and they showed him the evidence that he was at Sean's apartment. They pushed him on it, and he eventually changed his story. He said he did go to St. Louis and he and Sean did go out, but he dropped Sean back off at his apartment alive and well and went home. He has no idea what happened after that. And the reason he initially lied was because he didn't want to be a suspect. They asked Dale if he would take a polygraph, and he did, and he failed it. So now I don't put a lot of stock in polygraphs. Not surprised Dale thought he could trick one. The police do put a lot of stock in these, and they really hoped Dale would, so they tried to use the failed results to get him to change his story or to admit to something, but he didn't.
I just talked to somebody about this with regards to my brother's case, and she told me that it's very common for police to use a polygraph as a tool to pressure a suspect into telling the truth, and that it's very effective because if they feel like they are cornered, they will eventually start talking. So I'm glad that they did that. And of course, I'm not surprised at all by Dale's behavior. He's classically exactly reacting the way that I would expect him to.
Right, exactly. So the investigators had arrested him and they were getting close to when they had to charge him or release him because lying about being with Sean and failing a polygraph wouldn't be enough for charges because that polygraph wasn't even admissible in court.
Mm-hmm.
But then they talked to Kevin, Dale's other son, and he said that his father had recently had them both sign for life insurance policies. Kevin thought it sounded odd when Dale approached him about it, so he called Dale's insurance agent to kind of go over it. And he told Kevin this was a sound choice because it would basically be a tax break for Dale. So Kevin and Sean both signed the policies. Now, after making a few phone calls, the investigators in St. Louis learned that the policy on Sean's life was for $100,000.
Wow.
This was someone in an apartment without even utilities, and he had a $100,000 life insurance policy.
And it's the 80s.
And
That's
that's a lot of
of
money.
money.
That's a lot of money. And then they learned that he had also had a policy on his other son who died from a gunshot wound, and that was for $40,000, which Dale did collect.
And I'm sure he paid nothing for the funeral. I'm sure he gave nothing to Marianne.
The money just right in his pocket. Mm-hmm. It would later come out that he also had some smaller policies on Sean that would add an additional $40,000 to this. So $140,000 in life insurance on a 22-year-old. Dale had taken out this policy on Mark. Months later, he was dead. Now, the same thing happened again with Sean. This was the motive the police needed, and that's when they were able to formally charge Dale with murder, and he was denied bail.
Good.
So less than a week after his arrest, it was Christmas Eve, Dale had yet another story. So first story, not even there. Second story, I was there, but I didn't do it. He was alive and well. Brand new story. This is the one he told the police after he sat in his cell for a little bit, cooling his heels. He repeated it in media interviews. He did an interview with People magazine, told them this story, and it's what he would take with him to trial. And that's that he and Sean were drinking that night, not excessively, of course, and they went to drive through a rural area for some random reason. They pulled over to look at the scenery, and if you've ever been in a rural St. Louis area, I'm not sure what scenery they were looking at.
And it's at night, right? Like this is nighttime.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. So they decided to pull over, look at the scenery, and Sean asked if he could see Dale's gun. So Dale handed him the gun, and after a short time, Dale went back to the car to grab a soda. So I'm going to tell you what he said according to what he said to People magazine. He said, "I heard Sean say, 'Tell Mom I love her and I'm sorry.' I heard another shot and looked up to see Sean crumpling. Once I realized he was dead, I had to analyze what I would do next. In order to make it look more like murder, I fired the second shot." According to him, he was sparing Marion's feelings because, as we know, he cared so much about her. He didn't want her to think that her son had taken his own life.
So he's claiming that Sean killed himself. That yes. Is he claiming that Sean was on the phone with her, or he just saying that out loud as he shot himself?
He's just saying this to
air?
Dale.
Oh,
he's telling Dale, "Tell Mom I love her and I'm sorry." Shot himself, and then said when he realized he was dead, he shot him again to make it look like murder.
Which that part is what I think makes it not believable.
Right.
Because I'm like, why? If he killed himself, he killed himself, and then that's what happened. You call the cops or the whoever to come and take care of his body. Like, you don't shoot him again.
Yeah, he said he took Sean's wallet and hid it so that it would look like a robbery murder in the middle of a farm in rural Missouri. And he thought somehow that would be easier for Marion to handle. Neither of the shots appeared to be self-inflicted, so the investigators obviously didn't believe him.
It's just astonishing the level of arrogance here too. Like, he's just like, I'm going to say this and everyone's going to believe me and I'm going to get out of jail and everything's going to be fine.
The weirdest thing is some people did believe him. particularly in El Dorado. They were shaken up by this arrest. They just could not believe that their beloved Dr. Cavaness, the one who had helped so many of them, killed his own child, let alone over money.
Children.
Children. Yes. At this point, he has only been charged with one, but I will say children. They were so sure he was innocent, though. They raised $40,000 for his defense fund, and they
Wow.
hired a top-notch defense attorney in St. Louis to represent him. And this support is rather amazing because this is not a wealthy area. These supporters were largely the people who relied on his good works of not sending them bills to get health care. So it really says a lot for their sincerity. Like, I don't want to be crapping on them. Like, they sincerely gave what money they could to help someone they thought was being framed.
Oh, there were victims in this too. They just didn't know it.
Exactly. The Chicago Tribune even ran quotes from some of the people in town because this story did get picked up, particularly when the town came together to fund his defense. And they called it a deplorable grand-scale character assassination, a diabolical plot to frame him. That's the sort of thing the town was saying. They talked to a local banker who was heading up the defense fund, and he did admit that the donation slowed pretty greatly after Dale came up with the suicide story. So the first week, things were going pretty well, started slowing down after the suicide story, but there were a lot of people sticking with him. And one that I think will show you just the loyalty Dale had from his patients. One person said, if he did do it, I hope and pray they can't prove it.
Wow.
A 22-year-old was dead, and they were sticking by him even if he did it.
His
At least
own
this person
kid.
was. His own kid.
Like, ridiculous.
And this is the second 22-year-old son he's had shot to death. Now, Kevin had something to say that really hit me. And he said, quote, "The people who are speaking out for him now know him the least as a person. I was reared in his shadow, and I know." God, how often do we hear children or adults accuse someone of abuse, and we literally hear, but he seems so nice. He's a nice guy to me. She's so fun. She would never have done that. Like, he is saying, you know him the least. You know the side of him he let you see. I was in his shadow my entire life. I know what he's capable of.
It's just so powerful to think about that, and the weight of that statement. It must be a very heavy burden for Kevin.
Yeah, he was speaking out against an entire town.
Wow.
The first trial was held in July 1985, but it did end up in a mistrial. Right before closing statements, the jury accidentally saw the failed polygraph and an erroneous report that said Dale had confessed. Someone had left both of those on a table in their view. Why they were even in the courtroom when they're not admissible, I have no idea. Dale's attorney wanted him to be allowed out on bail while he waited for the second trial and asked for bail, but the court denied it largely because of Kevin. He went to the court and he's like, this guy has life insurance policy on me. Two of my brothers are dead. He collected the policies on them, collected it on one, presumably would have tried to collect Sean's if he didn't get arrested. He's like, I'm in danger, and I just testified against him in this first trial. I am in danger. And he and his wife were genuinely fearful of what Dale would do if he was out of prison.
Of course.
So he stayed locked up pending the second trial, which took place 4 months later. And at this trial, Dale couldn't get out of his own way. His attorney would be cross-examining a witness, and Dale would keep calling him back to the table to try to tell him something. He was trying to pass him notes, giving him questions to ask. And Dale got so frustrated. Mind you, the lawyer's frustrated, but Dale got so frustrated that he asked permission to question the medical expert himself. The state objected. They're like, you have a right to act as your own attorney, but you have an attorney. You don't get both. He was being represented by an attorney, and the attorney didn't want him to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Dale was asked, does he want to go pro se? Does he want to get rid of the attorney? And he didn't. He just wanted to take over questioning. And the state said it was going to be too disruptive. Dale's attorney, he knew his client. He knew this wasn't going to go over well. The judge cautioned him against it, but Dale insisted. So the judge ended up permitting it. And I think largely judges will give defendants these little wins to help give them a fair trial and say, you got the trial you wanted. You can't appeal on this decision later. You
Mm-hmm.
got what you wanted. So Dale gets up there and he starts arguing the medical evidence with the expert. Now, he is a doctor. I'm sure he's fully qualified to blah, blah, blah. But let's think about the optics here. He's literally holding his child's autopsy. Photos of his son with a gunshot wound, 2 gunshot wounds to his head, and he's discussing them with the detachment of a medical professional. And he's being accused of the murder. How does this look to the jury?
Not good.
Fair or not, it's not looking good.
Well, he did it to himself too.
Oh, absolutely.
So whether it's fair or not is on him.
Yes.
Because he had the option to not do this, and he decided to do it anyway.
And I have to imagine his attorney said, hey, Dale, if you're going to sit there and discuss the bullet wound to your son's head, you better squeeze out a tear or two. Like, you come on. And he looked cold and callous, which I think is probably a fair representation of how he felt. So the jury took the case, less than 3 hours of deliberation before they came back with a guilty verdict on first-degree capital murder. They did not buy Dale's story at all. So in Missouri, first-degree murder only has 2 options: life without parole or the death penalty. There's no life with parole options for first-degree murder here in Missouri. The jury recommended a sentence of death, which is what the judge accepted and imposed in January 1986. So Dale was sent off to death row, which at the time was at Missouri State Penitentiary in Jeff City, which is now closed as a prison, but it is open for ghost tours, which is pretty grim. Pretty grim. The old gas chambers even still there with the pipe going up. It's a lot. I took my kids on a field trip to Jeff City, and somehow that was on the agenda. So I was there with like a 5-year-old. It was something. I was like, oh, maybe we could talk about criminal justice a different way than visiting death row. But the appeals process in death penalty cases are automatic. Dale would have a right to an appeal, but he did not end up making it that long. 10 months after he was sent to death row, Dale took his own life. He left behind a note which did not mention any of his children. He left behind a will that did not include any of his surviving children, which at this point he only had 2 left. And he left behind a life insurance policy that didn't benefit his children. Pretty much everything went to his long-term girlfriend, Martha.
Wow.
The life insurance policy Dale had on his own life had a suicide clause. Like, it wouldn't pay in the event of a suicide for a period of time after it was taken out. The clause expired the day before Dale killed himself. Like I said, if this man understands one thing, it's insurance.
Wow. Well, he actually waited to the last minute.
Yep. He waited until that clause expired so that his girlfriend would get the money. One last FU to the insurance companies that he had been fleecing for years. And I think really at the end of this case, the question a lot of people had to face was, how could Dale seem so kind and caring to them, yet so destructive and selfish when it came to his family? The people he should love the most, he treated the worst. He was so greedy for money that he killed one son and allegedly killed the other. Well, I guess he's dead. He can't sue me for defamation. He killed both of them. Let's just face it. He wouldn't send a bill to a patient, but he'd kill his own kids for money.
Wow.
I really think we give people a lot of praise for being good outside the home. And there are some people who feed off that.
Yep.
And when they don't get it, when they can't get it, when they're behind closed doors and nobody cares if they're good or not, that's when you see the real them.
Yep. Yeah, I know. I think we both have experience with people like that in our lives.
Mhm.
I can see why you are obsessed with this case.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
definitely ringing a lot of bells for me. It's so tragic. It's awful what happened to the two kids, to Mark and Sean.
Mhm.
Um, I'm glad that he was arrested, and I'm glad that he didn't get away with what he did. Um,
Yeah.
it's just tragic.
And for our listeners out there who are recognizing someone in their life, through Dale, if you're someone who heard, "Oh, your dad's so nice," or "Your mom's so cool," or "Your partner is so generous," when you know that's only their public face, I mean, we see you,
Yeah,
we hear you, we get it, and we believe you.
yeah.
We've both been there, and we are sorry if you were there. But hopefully, in sharing stories like this, we can expose hidden abuse. And if you are ever in a situation where someone is disclosing abuse to you and your first thought is he doesn't seem the type or she doesn't seem the type, just hold that. Hold that to yourself for a minute
Mhm.
and think about, do you really know this person or do you just know them in a single context?
So, thank you so much for listening in on our conversation. And if you'd like to join in on this discussion, talk about this case or any other issues, including the issue of hidden abuse, you can search for Crime Lines and Consequences on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And with that, we'll see you in a few weeks.